All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I want to thank my special panelists, Lisa Bisson and Katie Reagan. Regan or Reagan?
It's Regan.
It is Regan. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No,
I
that's
want to
okay.
thank you guys for joining us today and providing some of your insight and wisdom. Lisa, this may be boring for you, but Katie, this might be new for you in terms of my intro to Generation Bridge. Today we're talking about caregiver resources, not resource E. Sorry, there's a typo. But anyways, what I want to talk about today, and what we actually came together thinking through, what could we do together at SWACA, Southwestern Connecticut Agency on Aging, and Masonicare to kind of help people who are in this sandwich generation, those who might be taking care of loved ones who are younger, kind of like myself. I have a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old. And then my mom is getting into her age where she's starting to need a little bit more help, although thankfully her health has been great up to this point. Just little things here and there, more chore days, that kind of stuff, but not necessarily having to be really involved in a lot of other things. So people that might be a little bit further along in that, where you're getting the stress of having to do more intense caregiving on both sides of the spectrum, true situation of burning a candle at both ends of the wick. And so today what we wanted to do is we said, all right, let's talk about the resources. Let's give people a landscape of where these things are, where you can go and get help, and do it in a quick and fast format. So today's half-hour webinar, we're going to try to just run through a lot of information. But ultimately, at the end of it, we're also going to provide out a handout that people can use as a resource guide for local and for national type of information. Now, today's purposes, we are talking more about Connecticut because we are dealing in our little area, but these same resource guides and kind of points of advice will apply to everyone. What is Generation Bridge? Well, Generation Bridge is actually a faith-based project. It's not a business. I make nothing off of this. It started in 2018. I was working with my church, the United Methodist Church of Monroe, and we were saying, how could we help people out using our skills? My wife and I are both in events, and we said we could do something cool, like have a wine expo or something like that. And then they said, well, as Methodists, maybe that's not the best idea, and so ultimately we just decided, okay, let's talk about what people need in the community. And the sandwich generation actually came up, and that's where I met Lisa so long ago. Ultimately, what I found out from that was just how much I didn't know. But I also found out how important it is to learn some of this information before it becomes a place where you have to make decisions in an emergency environment. Now, as a faith-based project, I just want to say, like, I find so much comfort in things like what the Bible tells us in so many different ways. I want to read one little piece here for you today that does deal with a little bit of what we're talking about. Because our main goal at Generation Bridge is to provide people who have questions access to people who have answers. That's why Katie's here today. That's why Lisa's here today. Ecclesiastes 4, 9 through 12 says, two are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. I think what we try to do in so many life stage issue scenarios is we try to navigate it by ourselves. And we try to run through it and say we don't want people to think we're weak or we don't know something, so we don't reach out to people when we need to. And this is what we do here at Generation Bridges. We want to let you know that there are resources and people out there who can help you with the things that you're dealing with today. So with that said, I would love to just let Katie and Lisa introduce themselves, and then we'll get right into the topic. So Katie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. So hello, everyone. My name is Katie Regan. I'm the director of the Aging Answers department here at Southwestern Connecticut Agency on Aging. I've been with the agency for, goodness, it's almost going on 20 years. And I coordinate the department that oversees a number of smaller grant programs, private programs, obviously the Choices program, which is the largest program that the state of Connecticut has to provide information, supportive assistance, help to navigate seniors or their loved ones through, questions that they may have to ideally keep their loved ones safe in the community. And we coordinate these services for 14 towns in Lower Fairfield County, so from Monroe, Trumbull area, all the way down to Greenwich. But I just always like to point out that the Agency on Aging is, funded under the Older Americans Act. So there are 5 Agency on Agings in the state of Connecticut. Again, we just coordinate those services and supports for the Lower Fairfield County. But if you're watching this and you reside in Waterbury, there's an Agency on Aging that covers your region. If you live in the Valley, Seymour, Derby, again, there's an Agency on Aging for you. There is one of 5. And really to connect to them, the best way to connect to any Agency on Aging in the state of Connecticut is by calling the Choices toll-free number, which is 1-800-994-9422. And it goes through your prefix of your phone. So for example, for me, who lives in the greater Naugatuck Valley, if I called that number, it would connect me to the North Haven Agency on Aging, which covers the valley. So no matter where you are watching this now, or no matter where your loved one is, you could call and connect with a free Choices trained counselor.
Excellent. Thank you, Katie.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately too, you guys, how many people do you think are working at SWACA right now?
Sure. We have over 100 employees. Um,
So, so I
again,
would say you've got a lot of resources and a lot of people who
oh,
have a
yeah.
lot of expertise in something
Yes.
like this. And it's not just 2 or 3 people that are ultimately
No.
going to be answering people's questions. It's a lot. Lisa, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. I'm Lisa Bisson, and I'm the Director of Community Outreach for Masonicare at Wesley Village. Wesley Village became a part of the Masonicare family back in January. And what that did was that helped us become more of a continuum as far as senior care is set up. So we have access to home care resources, we have access to hospice care resources, and then we have several different communities that provide senior living options throughout the state of Connecticut. The difference between Masonicare and some of the other organizations that provide similar services is that Masonicare is a nonprofit organization, and we have different, let's call them safety nets, set up at our different sites that provide an alternative for seniors once the funds start to run low. So typically living in an assisted living community, the big question is always what happens when I run out of money? Well, thankfully, Masonicare has set up a few different options to help ensure that the seniors who are a part of our communities don't have to leave simply because their funds are running low.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys. I'm going to stop the share now. And it'll just be the 3 of us now kind of presenting, having a conversation. Picture us in chairs up on a stage, and we're all just having a nice little conversation with hot lights going on our faces and all that good stuff. At any rate, so one of the biggest things that I found out in 2018, again, was how much I didn't know. There are a lot of things that are complex. There are things that you don't even have any idea the questions to ask when something happens as an emergency. I was primary caretaker for my grandmother at the time. She was in Lincoln, Illinois. She had a fall. And this wasn't 2018, this is slightly before that. She had a fall, broke her hip, and she was going into skilled rehab. I had no idea what that meant. I just flew out there and I tried to help her to feel as comfortable as possible, but she was still she was still good mentally, right? But that was my first introduction to, okay, there's a system in place that I'm not so sure of. And then when 2018 comes around, we create this event that happens at Massac High School for the sandwich generation. And then I realized just how complex it is as people start to move into a caregiver role, especially when you start adding in
Hmm.
conditions on top of it, right? So
Hmm.
let's say dementia comes into it or other
Yeah.
things. What do you guys feel? And feel free to answer this as you go. You know, this isn't necessarily scripted, but what do you guys feel are some of the most common oversights that people have or things that they should be looking for to help kind of guide them before they get into that emergency situation?
Sure. I'll take this, Lisa. And then
Yeah,
you could feel free to interrupt or chime in at any time. Um,
absolutely.
I do a number of presentations. We're really, out there in the community a lot, the community that we serve, our 14 towns. And, one thing I always try to stress at these presentations is to first applaud people for coming.
Hmm.
Um, aging is not something that sometimes we all want to talk about, but it's something that happens to us all, right? So really what I encourage people to do is just knowing that the agency on agings are out there. The local senior centers are much more than just your bingo and your field trips or your trips to the biggie, which are lovely, but many senior centers, especially in our neck of the woods, house the social work department, who again, know those in town smaller community resources, and then again the broader pictures. So we get a tremendous amount of phone calls from not only caregivers, but from the individual, the senior themselves, who say, "Hey, listen, um, I'm okay right now. I'm managing well in my home, but I'm just curious. Down the road, I want to help my family to be prepared, because also often we do get those calls from people who are in the emergency room. Their loved one is going to the hospital is discharging them to home. They live independently, but now they need assistance with their ADL needs, with bathing, with dressing, with grooming. They never received Meals on Wheels. How does that work? Who do I call? Do I have to charge? Is there a fee for Meals on Wheels? But my loved one is diabetic. She can only eat certain things. So the whole soup to nuts. It's always, like I say to families, it's like peeling back the layers of an onion. It's never just one thing. So if you can hopefully just better educate yourself while things are going okay, or while things are steady, then it's not as, hopefully it's not as overwhelming when a situation occurs. you know so whether it's just getting a simple little binder and just sticking some information in there. I've had a lot of success, especially with the younger um, caregivers. I've seen that many of them have been creating a free email, just nana@gmail.com, and that's where everything goes to. And because again, you have siblings who are in Chicago, in New York, in California, and everybody wants to be involved and everybody wants to help, which is wonderful. But the person here in Connecticut, is trying to navigate it all and trying to play telephone tag. So I've had a lot of caregivers who have created that free Hotmail account, iCloud, whatever, and everything goes into there. And everybody who has a caregiver role has the password. So you know what? You want to know what mom's doctor said? It's right in there. Go. Feel free to look. You want to know how many days a week mom is getting Meals on Wheels or what her insurance is? It's right in there. Everything is in there for everybody. So trying to kind of almost a little bit get ahead of the game, I just think it helps a lot more when unfortunately a situation does arise. Then you know at least where to go.
Yeah, I would say that that's the kind of nugget in my mind, right? That is, it's one of those things you don't get until you listen to something like this.
Mm-hmm.
You could go through 1,000 articles and never hear that one piece. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason why you know that is because you're dealing with multiple people who are in that situation. Honestly, I had never thought about that. I love that idea because it's centralizing all communication to one
Mm-hmm.
thing. Also, potentially getting other things linked to that email. And I'm
Oh
not
yeah.
to say like, careful with cybersecurity and all that stuff, but at the same time, like if your bank account is linked to that email,
Mm-hmm.
now you can work in there if you've got power of attorney or something else where
Yeah.
we had to deal with that with my grandmother. And thankfully she had done things ahead of time before dementia really set in. that we were able to figure that out. I think another piece there that you mentioned is the senior center that's local. Almost every
Yes.
town, at least here in Connecticut that
Mm-hmm.
I know of,
Have a
has
senior
a
center.
senior center. And I wouldn't be surprised if nationwide it's the same way.
Mm-hmm.
When I search out different towns and things, they usually have it. In the case of my grandmother, that was my saving grace, right? My father and I had gone out to go see my grandmother, see what was going on. And she decided that she was going to change her mind and that we shouldn't actually be out there. And we knew that she was dealing with dementia. We were going to be bringing her back home, or back to the East Coast, I should say. Her home was Lincoln, Illinois, but we were going to bring her out to the East Coast, and she had agreed to that 6 months prior. But all of a sudden, she throws the wrench in the works there. And if I hadn't done the 2018 stuff that I had done, I wouldn't have known where to go. I went right to the senior center with my dad, who didn't know where to go, right? And we had no idea. And we said, where are some home care options who are some home care
Mm-hmm.
options that we should be looking at
Mm-hmm.
since we can't manage her from close by, right? And they gave us 4 or 5 different vendors. And within an hour or two, we had all the interviews set up so that we could
Mm-hmm.
talk to them. They could interview with my grandmother while we were there because we weren't going
Yeah.
to be there for long. And the senior center was the resource there. Lisa, you're really familiar with the senior centers. You could speak to them a lot
Mhm.
because not only do you go and know everybody at them, but you present and do other things like that. What are your thoughts on the senior center as a resource hub for someone who's getting into this caregiving game?
100%. And it's probably going to be an unpopular opinion, but I would stress that the internet is not the best resource, especially when you're talking about senior care. Your local resources know far
Mm-hmm.
more about
Yep.
what's going on than you will ever find on the internet. And there's so much misinformation just talking about Medicaid and what does it
Oh.
cover in New
Mm-hmm.
Jersey versus what it covers in California. Things like estate law, POAs and healthcare's proxies and all of that stuff. The guidelines are different state by state. So
Mm-hmm.
starting at your local senior center or the senior center in the area mom or dad is really, looking at moving into is probably the best resource because they're telling you what's true right here,
Yeah.
right now in
Right
this
now.
spot.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had so many conversations with family members who are like, well, I moved my mother-in-law into a nursing home in Colorado, and they said this. And you really have to understand what's going on each state individually in order to understand the differences in each type of
Mm-hmm.
community. But I always recommend your local agency on aging and your local
Mm-hmm.
senior centers as your best resource for information.
Yeah, and you know me very well too, that I'm always a big fan of saying pick up
Mhm.
the phone and call somebody who will
Yes.
answer.
Mm-hmm.
If you go online, it's great, but you don't always know what you're searching for. And having a conversation with Katie or Lisa or somebody like them, they can oftentimes understand what you're asking. And here's the deal for all of you people out there that will listen to this at some point. I hope you do listen to this. Um, these individuals, they deal with many scenarios all the time. You're dealing with it once at one time. And seems overwhelming for you because you're trying to find all those answers to that one scenario. But chances are someone like Lisa or Katie has seen this probably 10 or
Yes.
15 times,
Mm-hmm.
and they
Mm-hmm.
have good solutions that will guide you there quickly as opposed to you trying to stumble through it. Um,
Yeah.
are there other resources? So, obviously the internet, maybe not the best in terms of giving you everything that you want, but are there good resources online that you guys have found? I would say SWACA's website is a great resource. But are there other resources online that you guys have found to be good places to start your search?
Like the AARP website, I think there's a lot of good information because it approaches it from both sides. It's giving you helpful information, but it also recognizes that, there are 70 and 80-year-olds taking care of their parents who are 90
Yeah.
or over
Mm-hmm.
100. And
Mm-hmm.
it kind of has a broader spectrum of information.
Yeah. I would say, obviously, like you said, SWACA.org is a phenomenal resource as well. All 5 agency on agings have come together, and there's a website called agingct.org. That as well is a fantastic website because, again, people watching this may reside in other parts of the state. As well as, I would honestly say the Connecticut chapter of the Alzheimer's Association has a very good website. I know Alzheimer's is a scary word. Think of dementia as an umbrella, and Alzheimer's disease is just one of the spokes of that umbrella. Okay, there are many forms of dementia that unfortunately, some people may unfortunately be diagnosed with. You can look to that website as a resource not only for the different stages of the disease, but also how to care for yourself, when you're caring for a loved one who has a diagnosis of dementia. There's tons of tips, techniques, different approaches one can take. Again, how to research caregiver support groups on there. So, I mean, I refer many people to that website as well.
Yeah, I find that I think let's go a little bit deeper into sort of that caregiver support and some of that kind of thing. Oftentimes people get into this and there's an obligation and a heavy heart that this is my obligation to my parent or somebody else. But it's a lot of work too, and there can be burnout and there can be other
Mm-hmm.
things there
Mm-hmm.
that come in. What are some of the things that can lighten the load? Obviously, a support group could be one of those, but are there any other sources that people could look up to see if there are some ways to lighten the load off of that caregiver's role so that they don't get burnout, that they don't actually get to a point where they start to think of this caregiving scenario as a resentful thing or a burden type of thing.
Sure. So the state of Connecticut does offer two programs specifically for caregivers. One is called the National Family Caregiver Support Group, which is actually also nation-based. Every state does coordinate that program a little bit different. But if one were to apply for that program, they could. The state of Connecticut will provide respite services in the home. So
Okay.
let's say sending in an aide for a couple hours, a couple days a week to give that caregiver a break, so that they can go to their own medical appointments, so that they can go out to lunch with a friend, so that they could just go, stroll around Target, whatever, get a little bit of a reprieve, or pay for, a day or two at a local adult day center so that someone can go and have the stimulation and socialization, that's so important as we age. So there's that national program. There's also the Connecticut version, which is called the Connecticut Statewide Respite Care Program. And that's specifically for individuals who have a diagnosis of dementia. But again, providing that caregiver respite, because caregiver burnout is real. Caregiving got a big spotlight during COVID, obviously. But caregiving burnout, caregiver stress has been going on for long before COVID. So reaching out to your local agency on aging through that 1-800 number. There is obviously an application that needs to be filled out, but that's part of our role. That's part of our job, is to help somebody fill out that application and then apply for the services if they're eligible, and hopefully connect with the care manager so that they can develop a plan of care with the individual.
That's great. Lisa, how about for you? Similar type of question, resources out there for them.
Well, I think our biggest problem is that we're afraid to ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
And in some situations, being the primary caregiver is the best solution, both financially and otherwise. But sometimes you really have to look at taking a step back and whether or not there's somebody outside the home, outside the family, who could do a better job than you could in taking care of mom or dad. And it's not a question of love or intent or any of that, but especially dealing with folks with dementia. Caregivers out there are trained in dementia behaviors, in engaging folks with dementia, in de-escalating argumentative situations, in brokering conversations and memories and whatnot, that it's just like sometimes when you talk to a parent about homeschooling, they have to do a lot of work in order to homeschool their kids. I think a caregiver has to do an awful lot of work as far as in service and understanding before they become an expert on taking care of somebody with dementia. And those are the cases where I think it's most important for families to take that step back out of the emotional tie and ask, does it make sense to bring somebody into the home? Or does it make sense to move mom or dad into another community where the level of care is much higher than I could provide at home?
Yeah, I think it is important to note that um, especially every care scenario is going to be different. But when you start adding in conditions, and it could be dementia, but it could also just be physically not able to move around as much, all types of things. There are going to be people who have done this kind of stuff for a career or, hundreds of times, and they're going to be able to quickly give you some scenarios. So, like again, you go into somebody like at SWACA or anybody that's in this place, you can pick up the phone and call Lisa and say, who do you know that deals with making my house safer so that my mom or her house safer so that she can navigate around and not trip on something. Those types of things. There are people that you can talk to who are willing to provide you with that information. And I think also on the dementia side, we aren't used to it all the time. So that person that might be dealing with dementia and we're dealing with them, I can remember with my grandmother, and I can feel bad about this at times too, is I just kept trying to correct her and try to remind her that this we talked about this, Grandma. We did. This was, we just talked about it an hour ago. And I would just keep saying that because I didn't quite understand, like, oh, I thought this was how we fight progression of this thing, right? Like, don't you remember that we talked about it? And then eventually you start to read up on it and you hear from other people that that's not really going to be productive. And you getting angry about them not remembering something is definitely not going to be productive. And that there are ways to kind of cut through that and things to look for. I remember one woman who was with me in the beginning of Generation Bridge. She was taking care of her father who had Alzheimer's, and she just realized very quickly that there were certain things that would set him off, and they had to figure out an internal code about, like, hey, the husband and wife talking to each other saying, "You're escalating this. You need to take a step back." Because otherwise it's going to get into a bigger fight, right? And so they had a code word, and it was some like it was either a Seinfeld character or something like that. But the second one of them said it, it instantly said, okay, you have to take a step back and it's time to move away onto a different conversation or something. And those are things you learn by talking to your friends and others that have also been through it. So I would encourage people to really look out to the professionals who are like here on the call, the sites and the places that they represent and that they know of. And at the same time, those support groups are going to be great because you're going to be talking with people who are either in it or have been in it at a different stage than you are now. And you'll be able to quicken your learning curve on that. And I think one of the biggest things that we can all do is prepare ahead. Even if you're not in it right now, start looking at this kind of stuff because if your parents are getting older, just know some of the questions you should ask. Know who are the resources. Find your agency on aging. Take a tour, like we talk about this, Lisa, all the time. Take a tour of a place so that you understand the differences between places so that when a fall happens and they're going to be discharged, you have a say in where they're going to be discharged to. There's a lot of things to just consider learning about. Is there any last minute advice as we start to wrap this up, guys? Any last minute advice you'd like to give to people when they're thinking about, all right, I'm getting into this, it's getting frustrating. Where am I going to turn to in order to find some help?
I always tell people, just like everything else you do in life, have an if then plan. If mom were to need extra help, mom were to stop driving, mom were to whatever, how would we as family caregivers adapt to that? Would she need to move? Are we close enough to be able to help her? If mom's health declines to this point, would we consider selling the house or moving her into a community? And make sure you talk to mom about what
Mhm.
she wants and what her vision for her future is. Because after 10 years of being in this industry, I can tell you the best move-ins are the ones where the actual resident came, saw, picked, decided that we were the right spot for them. versus the ones where the adult children came toward, decided we were the right spot, and then mom shows up one day with her suitcase and, a welcome sign.
Mhm.
And you might get a free lunch out of that.
Yeah,
Katie, how about for you
exactly.
guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched upon a lot, but I think just really, again, encouraging people to educate themselves as best as they can. It's not locking you into anything. I always tell my families, this phone call, I'm not going to send you a bill for this phone call. You know, this is free, unbiased information, referrals, support. That's what this is. We're not signing you up. We're not solicitors. You're not going to start getting follow-up phone calls from us. Hey, did you call Meals on Wheels? We're not protective services for the elderly. We're not going to come knocking on your door unless you invite us in and we're helping you fill out, something that maybe you're having a little difficulty with because of vision impairments or a language barrier or an intellectual disability. But really we're here to help and just try to navigate and know that there is a supportive service out there. There are numerous supportive services, both offered by the state and also private organizations that, again, because we're so embedded in the community, we know that there's grants out there offered in your town, for different various services. Or we know that if you're a veteran, hey, did you reach out? Did you go to the VAMC, which for our state is West Haven, because you could get those things that you're privately paying for right now because you are a veteran. So just trying to make those connections to people.
Yeah, I would say there is this, a half hour call is not going to teach somebody everywhere to go, but it's going to get you into the place where you can start to look at some of these different
Mm-hmm.
things. There's a lot of nuance into a lot of different scenarios, especially when you start adding in veterans benefits, et cetera. I think
Mm-hmm.
my biggest thing is one, know the resources that are out there, know the places that you can reach out to that I like to call it the ones that reach many, right? So find the places, the hubs that can connect you with all the different places you might need to go. But then the other important thing that I think a lot of people forget is it's important to ask questions, to talk with other people, and to
Mm-hmm.
say this stuff with your friends, your family,
Yes.
your church, somebody. The
Mm-hmm.
more that you internalize it, the less you're going to actually be able to help solve the problems that maybe you're facing. But the second you open that discussion up where, hey, I'm really having a hard time with my mom, or I'm really having a hard time with my dad, or I'm having a real hard time balancing my kid's schedule with everything else I'm trying to do. What you'll find out is that either people have been there and they can give you advice, or you might actually find people that are going to step up and say, can I get you guys a meal? Can I do this? Um, don't internalize. I think that's the biggest thing I would say for outside of knowing the resources that are out there publicly, but don't internalize things and try to get through it on your own. Open up. It's going to relieve this weight on your shoulders, and you're going to be able to start to figure out paths to go forward. So I want to thank you, Katie. I want to thank you, Lisa, for taking some time with us today. If you guys are watching this and thinking about something for next week, well, next week, but in the virtual world, it could be might be looking at it and just click the next video. I don't know. But at any rate, we're going to be doing some 12 tips or so to help with time management, which I think is a big part. And then later on, we're going to be doing another one on family care planning. So making sure that your family's aligned to provide care for your loved one. So join us on some of those. Thanks again, guys, and I wish you guys a blessed day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.